Matthew Burchette, and this is Behind the Wings. Oh yeah, baby. This is the good life right here.
Now I say this a lot, but how cool is this?
This is Lieutenant Zach Farrell. To my right is Jay Gates, the amazing Gene Kranz.
You've never seen aerospace like this. The Beech Aircraft Company was founded in 1932 by Walter Beech in the air capital of the world, Wichita, Kansas. Determined to produce an aircraft for the business executives of the day, Beechcraft found success in their first aircraft, the Model 17 Staggerwing. By the late 1930s, Beech knew that his company needed a new design, and the Model 18 was born. First flown in 1937, the Beechcraft Model 18 became the perfect aircraft for the private owner and charter operator. But with the onset of World War II, the U.S. military adapted the versatile Beech 18 for military use. Thousands of Beech 18s were used by the United States military for photo reconnaissance, light transport, and bombardier and aircrew training. The four variants used by the Army Air Forces included the AT-7 Navigator, AT-11 Kansan, C-45 Expeditor, and the F-2 Expeditor. In the post-war era, the Beech 18 resumed its role as a distinguished business aircraft and regional airliner. Over its lifespan, more than 9,000 of these aircraft were built, making the Beech 18 one of the most widely used light aircraft in the world. Let's check out some of the features of the C-45 at Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum with pilot and our longtime volunteer, Jay Gates.
Thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about how you became a pilot.
Well, it was by default in some respects, as my grandfather was a World War I pilot, my father was a World War II pilot, and then I joined the National Guard when I was 18 years old, so I didn't have too much of a choice.
I was about to say, you didn't have a choice. You actually fly for the Commemorative Air Force, and you fly their C-45. Now, how did you get involved with that?
I've been involved with the Commemorative Air Force now for almost 20 years. They have a B-17 and several other kinds of airplanes, B-25, and I started flying those airplanes. And then the guys up here in Denver said, hey, we need a Beech 18 pilot, would you come over and help us with that? So I've been now with the Mile High Wing for about 6 years.
So we're just standing here in front of this really highly polished, gorgeous lady, and one of the things I'm noticing are two pitot tubes on this thing. Let's start there. Two pitot tubes. What's up with that?
Well, it's a backup system. You have a primary and a secondary, so to speak. Either one is the same, but one goes to the pilot side of the instrument panel and the other one goes to the co-pilot side of the instrument panel. So you have a backup and they both connected, so if one should block, you still have airspeed on both sides.
Is that normal for every plane?
In the early days, they did that a lot. Today, in modern aircraft, you may see two pitot tubes, but one's for a backup computer and the other one's for the primary computer. Okay. All
right, redundancy is a good thing when you're flying.
Especially in an old airplane.
Yeah, no kidding. One thing we've got to talk about before we go any further is during World War II, nearly every single Beech 18 that Beechcraft built went straight to the Army Air Forces, the Navy, or the Marine Corps. And the reason they did that was because they needed them to train pilots in many different roles. And the way to differentiate some of those roles is real easy. It's just by the nose. Let's check that out. Our model is a C-45, which was kind of the VIP transport, cargo transport version, but there were two others that the Air Force and the Navy and Marines flew, and one of them was the AT-7, which was the Navigator, which actually had a nose very similar to this, but then there was the AT-11, which was the Kansan. And what was so cool about that one?
Well, it had a glass nose, and it had a bombardier position, and believe it, it had a Norden bomb sight in it. And they actually trained students to drop bombs. And this airplane, or the airplane AT-11, could drop, I think, 2 bombs, and practice bombs.
That's very cool. I have heard a statistic that 90% of all the bombardiers in the U.S. Air Force trained in one of these during World War II.
It was a very cheap way to fly and a cheap way to train people instead of putting them in a big bomber or simulating like they used to as well. So it was easy to go out and train. They put a couple of bombardiers in here, and the instructor would instruct them how to do it, and they would actually fly the airplane automatically.
That is really cool. I kind of wish we had that version. It'd be so neat. In fact, in some of the AT-11s, they even trained gunnery students, and they had a top turret and even a tunnel gun back there. I mean, this was a really, really versatile little aircraft. All right, Jay, so let's talk about this Pratt & Whitney. These are what?
985 AN-14Bs.
Okay.
Built for this airplane, and they're 450 horsepower each. If you go back to when they first built these, they put Wasps on there at 350 horsepower. So by putting the Pratt & Whitneys on there, which really was a little better engine for this type of what they were using it for, gave it a little bit more horsepower and allowed it to climb up to a higher altitude as well. Even today, they use some of these as crop dusters.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes.
And it's a stylish little crop duster.
Well, it is, and it's fully aerobatic in some respects. There's some people that actually use them in shows and stuff.
No kidding. Wow, that's really cool. Well, let's keep going. I want to take a closer look at this plane because it's so gorgeous. Whoa. We gotta check out that tail. Sorry, Jay, I had to stop you, but this is not really a tail you see a lot these days.
No, it has 2 vertical stabs, 2 vertical stabilizers. And the idea behind that, again, is a little repetition. During the war, it was a problem with one rudder. You still had another rudder to work with. With that also, you eliminate having one great big huge vertical stab and a rudder.
Yeah, kind of like the B-17.
Correct.
Now, while we're right here, I'm noticing that all the control surfaces on this aircraft are fabric covered. And there's a pretty specific reason for that.
Well, again, during the war, if a bullet went through one of the control surfaces, it went clean through. And if it was metal, it would disturb the metal and probably disturb the airflow over that particular surface, which could be difficult to fly.
Then you induce flutter and all sorts of
Right, and
bad
then
things.
the mechanics, it was real easy because you just slap
a patch right on it.
A patch, and that was it.
Next day, you're back over Germany. Well, while we're also here, that is what they called the football. That
Right.
black, and there's actually an antenna inside that covering.
It's a loop antenna, and what it is, it's for AM frequencies, and it's a directional finder for the pilots to navigate to a particular station. Example, any of the AM radio stations in the Denver area, you would turn it and focus on that frequency, and it would tell you where that antenna is, so you would fly directly to it.
It's like old school GPS.
They called it ADF on your instrument panel at the automatic directional finder instrument, and it would point at that all the time, so you just steered to it.
Oh, that's really cool. So Jay, this probably looks a little bit familiar, doesn't it?
It does. It's more set up for 1942.
So let's walk through this. Let's start with the throttle quadrant. You got your 2 throttles, prop pitch, mixture, but then what is this down here?
Well, you have the manifold heat. Carburetor ice is a problem for carburetors, especially when it starts when you're up at altitude. So what we do is we introduce a little bit of heat to the carburetor to keep it from forming. And that's what these 2 do. Then over on the other side, you have oil shutters. as you get up in altitude, the oil has a tendency to cool off a little bit, and you want to keep it at a certain temperature. So what you do is you close off the intake for the cooling air, so that it now you shut down that cool air, and that keeps the oil warmer.
Oh, that's very cool. All of these are your instruments for engines.
Yes.
So you've got cylinder temperature, temp, RPM, manifold pressure, all that kind of stuff. But over on your side is what people tend to refer to as the six-pack.
The six-pack navigation system with the artificial horizon. You have the altimeter, airspeed, obviously. You have the turn and bank on the left-hand side. And then this particular airplane, in the early days of the 40s, the VOR started coming out. And so this particular airplane actually has a VOR gauge in it, which would have been later after the war in some cases.
This guy, magneto switches, I know that, but this bad boy, that's like master switch.
That's the master ignition switch, okay? If you had a problem like you had to make an emergency landing, instead of turning off your engines, you just hit that and it's a done deal.
Everything goes.
Yeah.
And then your two feathering switches, which then actually takes the blades of the propeller and turns them directly into the wind. So instead of biting like this, they just...
Correct. And basically, with an engine shut down, you want less drag. With the propeller windmilling, it creates a lot of drag, and right after takeoff, in some instances, you don't really need that drag. Okay, so you hit the button, it feathers the engine, and then you go through the process of just completely shutting it down, and then you come back around and land.
What's it like flying this old girl?
It is a piece of history, number one, and it's an honor to fly a Beech 18, especially the one I fly, which is a Navy Virgin SMB-5. But flying that airplane, it's just a dream to fly. It's very stable. It'll climb up to altitude. We fly it over the mountains. We go to Telluride and Steamboat.
Oh, wow.
It's just a really fun airplane to fly.
Oh, that's very cool. You know, it's amazing. Beechcraft has been in business since, what, 1932, I believe?
I believe so.
That's amazing, and they're still making aircraft today. In fact, our Colorado State Patrol aerial division is flying Beechcraft aircraft, and I think we probably ought to go check that out, even though it's very cool to be in here.
Believe it or not, it's because of this particular airplane, the Beech 18, the King Air was born.
No kidding. Oh, well then, I'm out. I gotta go check that out.
From Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum, we're heading down to Centennial Airport to visit the Colorado State Patrol's Aviation Section. As one of the many units of the State Patrol, the Aviation Section is responsible for transportation of government personnel and assisting in traffic enforcement. If you've ever seen the road signs that say, "Speed enforced by aircraft," that's the State Patrol making Colorado roads safer by tracking speeders and alerting officers on the ground. The entire state of Colorado is patrolled with just 5 aircraft, including 3 Cessna 182s, a Cessna 340, and this souped-up Beechcraft King Air that we are going to check out with pilot and good friend of mine, Phil Curry.
You are like a King Air aficionado, are you not?
I am. I'll claim that with 7,000 hours in the airplane.
Wow, that's a ton of hours. Now, here's something that a lot of people don't know, and it's kind of a big deal. You are the first civilian employee of the Colorado State Patrol's Aviation Section in their 53 accident-free year history.
That is correct. They were looking for somebody with a ton of hours, which I just mentioned.
Yeah.
And a lot of experience. Plus, I think some military background too helped. But yeah, I am the first true civilian pilot to fly for the Colorado State Patrol.
That is really cool. That's amazing. That's a lot of time.
It's an honor. It's a very big
Oh
honor.
yeah, no kidding. Well,
honor.
thank you for your service. Speaking of service, what does the King Air do for the Aviation Section?
This King Air is a King Air 200. We use this for air pull missions, which any state agency can use this airplane to transport their employees within the state.
So we were talking earlier, and one of the things you mentioned is that you have flown organs in this thing, transplant missions.
As part of University of Colorado Health, that hospital, they have a kidney transplant team that we fly regularly to
That's really
mostly
great.
places within the state, but we do fly Billings, Montana is one of the other places we go to. But
That's
yeah,
a worthwhile mission.
that's a very rewarding flight,
Oh,
too,
I bet.
to say the least.
I
Yeah.
bet.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a walk around of this aircraft. Maybe we start at the engines and
Start
we can
at the
kind of go
engines.
from there.
Yep.
All right,
Start at the
cool.
front.
So Phil, tell us a little bit about the plane. Like, what's the wingspan on this monstrosity? This is not a small plane.
That's not a small plane. We're standing at the front of 44 feet of length,
Wow.
about 55 feet of wingspan, and about 15 and a half feet of tail height.
That is a tall tail.
Tall tail is right, yeah.
With some big hangar doors to go with it.
Yep.
And then these guys, you've got two of these monster engines on this thing, and they are turboprops.
Turboprops.
Which
correct.
means what?
The jet engine powering a gearbox powering the prop.
Okay.
And our
what-
engines have 850 shaft horsepower. It's two of them, so we have 1,700 horsepower on a 12,500 pound airplane, which is a pretty good power to rate ratio.
What's your top speed?
It's about 300 knots, no wind, so that's 350 miles an hour. This plane will go,
Whoa.
even up to 35,000 feet. So it's a pretty good deal with this airplane.
No kidding. I can see why they're so popular.
Yep. And there's one other feature about this. It's a jet engine, turboprop, like you said. It reverse flows on the airflow. Most jet engines down the intake, out the tailpipe.
Right.
Right straight out the tailpipe. This engine actually makes a 180-degree turn on the air, comes back to the front of the engine here where the exhaust ports are, and exhausts.
That's crazy.
And the other thing we were pointing out, no mechanical connection to that power turbine right now.
So I could literally just hold on to this thing while you started the engines.
You could hold it for a while until, like I said, developed its 850 shaft horsepower, and you're not going to hold that anymore.
Yeah, let's not try that.
Now,
This is pretty schmancy in here.
pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, it is really nice. Now, you said that you fly the governor and other state officials, but the King Air as a whole is a really versatile airplane. So what are some of the other roles that this guy fulfills?
It truly is. The government flies them. Embassies overseas use them for transport, just like we do with the state. But there's also some few special mission airplanes that are out there that the military uses. The fire crews use a couple of models of the King Air for fire support, fire spotting here in Colorado quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
If you see a King Air down low over the trees in the mountains, there's usually a
lead
tanker behind them.
Yep.
But as King Airs go too, like I was talking about how stout and safe these airplanes are.
Yeah.
Coming back in from Craig to Denver, took a lightning strike at 25,000 feet from this side, the right side of the airplane, to that side. The bolt actually hit the prop, arced over to the aileron on that side. Two big burn holes in the aileron and a big chip out of the prop with a glass cockpit similar to this, not even a flicker, which tells you how well grounded that airplane is, because
No
it should have
kidding.
fried about anything else. It should have fried everything. Uneventful landing.
That's
New
crazy.
engine, new aileron, and good to go.
Back in the air.
Back in the air.
That's amazing.
Yep.
All right, before we go flying, because we're burning some really nice blue sky, I just want to show you something really cool. Look at this. How cool is that? I'm more enthralled with this than I am anything else. I'm a simple man. All right,
And one
let's
more
go
thing,
fly.
you didn't pick it, but you were in the governor's seat more often than not. That's the seat that
Oh,
you
really?
would sit in.
Ooh.
And I think the reason why it tends, so you can see where I'm sitting, you can sort of see what's going on up front, but you were in that seat of honor, I should say.
Well, and there you go.
Signal 3 Alpha Tango, traffic Cessna, 3 mile final for the parallel. About turn left base for the parallel semi.
Great, gears coming up. Right there.
Get up and go.
Yeah, she does.
Oh, wow, that's a heck of a climb rate.
Gear 50 Papa, amend your heading, turn left, heading 220.
Heading now, 220, left 220 for 50 above.
Yeah, baby.
These things, they perform unbelievably well at these altitudes.
Kidding. So of all the Beechcraft products you've flown, which is your favorite?
I think any of the King Air series is my favorite by far. You know, it's sort of biased by flying them for the last 20-something years, but we're talking before the engines, the airframe, one of the safest airplanes in the sky. The performance for us, State Patrol or anybody flying in the mountains, is phenomenal. You know,
With a 34 or a 35,000 foot ceiling, I mean, getting over our 14er mountains is
Not a
no
problem.
big deal. Having those twins out there, just, that kind of gives you a nice sense of security.
I'm sort of biased for that, only because of the mountains. There's a lot of very good single-engine turbine airplanes around, but you like to have two when you have to go to that side,
Yeah.
to the west.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's for Tarka 910.
Sorry, Tarka.
That's,
910, approach 128.45.
2845.
NORAD.
See ya.
Oh,
What's
okay.
what's the mountain?
Yeah, Cheyenne Mountain.
Cheyenne Mountain. That's NORAD. That's a no-go.
Okay.
Let me scroll over there and see. It should highlight it, which is really cool too.
Restrict.
Yep.
Yeesh.
Fly in there and you'll find some F-16 buddies hanging around you.
Previously on Behind the Wings,
That is really cool.
And whoa.
He's going across our nose. He's dispensing flares. He's popping flares. We are in trouble now. That is a signal that we're in serious trouble. We are going to follow this guy before he decides he needs to escalate. Yeah, that's not good. You've been flying how long, did you say?
My first flight was when I was 10, so that was 55 years ago.
Wow.
And approach number 387 Golf.
I'll wait on that one.
Like to request,
Yeah, we got to get into the
We're
pattern.
into where we need to be talking on the radio. We'll have some time to go over that one.
We're actually flying here, so we got to stop and go.
between the chatter on the radio, I learned that in Phil's flight career, he's flown many of the Beechcraft products, including the Bonanza, the T-34C Mentor, and of course, the classic Beech 18. While the original flight plan was to circle around Pikes Peak and fly over downtown Denver, the skies were a bit too bumpy for our camera crew, who are getting sick in the back seat. But closing in on Colorado Springs, we took the opportunity for a touch-and-go landing.
There's the Springs Airport, 12 o'clock out there. See, we're landing right up on the runway.
That's so cool.
It is 358. The other one's way over on the left side. We're cleared for an option, so we're going to do a touch and go. As we get closer to the runway, I'm getting below the glide slope, but I know that. So.
That's why we're showing.
Plenty of runway though to land on, that's for sure.
Yeah, so is that why we're showing 3 red?
Yep.
4 red?
4 red. We're below the Bassey, which you can see where that would take you, all the black marks on the runway. A little late, but we're fine. You got
68, runway 35 left, clear for the option.
We're fine.
Clear for the option, 35 left,
We are clear for the option. Okay, I'll reset the flaps. Trim. And off we go. Look at that, 8,000 feet remaining. Easy, 8,000 feet remaining.
And this thing's got some pickup.
Off we go again.
Oh, yeah, baby.
The lights, turn the yaw damp on because it's bumpy.
That's another one I can put into my book, my first touch and go.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I got to do it with you.
Yeah,
That's
what an
pretty
honor.
cool.
It's one of the most widely used light aircraft in the world, having been flown by both military and civilian personnel for decades. From exploring the C-45 Expeditor at Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum, to visiting the Colorado State Patrol's hangar at Centennial Airport, and even taking a flight in a souped-up Beechcraft King Air over the Colorado Front Range, we've taken you behind the wings of the Beechcraft Model 18. Better?
Oh. Sorry. Give us a little bit of, okay, hold on. Oh, I gotta get my brain going. So cool. Jay, thank you so much for, I always forget to say I'm going to shake your hand because then people are looking at me and they're like, oh, right.